The radio crackled with desperate voices. "Phoenix Base, this is Bravo 7. We are completely surrounded. Request immediate extraction. Repeat, immediate extraction. Silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Then, through the static, came something impossible. The soft thud of boots hitting concrete behind enemy fortifications. Not the thunderous arrival of a helicopter assault team. Not the rumble of armored vehicles breaking through perimeter walls. Just one person, landing with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. In 30 seconds, every hostile position went silent. When the smoke cleared, Bravo 7 emerged from their bunker to find their would-be captors. Neutralized with surgical precision. No casualties among the friends. No collateral damage to civilian infrastructure. Just clean, efficient work that shouldn't have been possible. But the person who had saved them was already gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of vanilla, perfume, and a crumpled bus ticket that read Route 47, Downtown Express. Earlier that morning, Sarah Chun had been running late for her accounting job at Morrison & Associates. The 8:15 bus was packed with the usual crowd of commuters, construction workers, and students heading to the community college. She pressed herself against the window, reviewing quarterly reports on her tablet, completely absorbed in spreadsheets and budget projections. The bus lurched through downtown traffic, stopping at Fifth Avenue, then Maple Street, then the shopping district. Sarah's attention was locked on a particularly complex expense analysis when she heard the driver announce something about construction delays and route changes. She glanced up briefly, noticed they were crossing the Riverside Bridge, and went back to her work. The bridge stretched over the Clearwater Valley, connecting the business district to the residential suburbs where most commuters lived. It was a routine crossing she'd made hundreds of times, but this morning was different. As the bus reached the center span, Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message that made her blood run cold. Emergency activation codes. Priority Alpha. Coordinates that placed American forces in immediate danger. Trapped in hostile territory with no conventional rescue options available. She looked around the bus. Tired faces, people checking their phones. A mother trying to keep her toddler entertained. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that somewhere across the ocean, 8 soldiers were about to die unless someone acted in the next 12 minutes. Sarah calculated distances, response times, available assets. The nearest military base was 40 minutes away. Special operations helicopters needed at least 20 minutes for emergency deployment. Even if command authorized immediate action, which they wouldn't without going through proper channels, it would take too long. But Sarah Chun wasn't just an accountant. She glanced at her watch. The bus was still moving across the bridge, suspended 300 feet above the valley floor. Through the rear window, she could see the river winding toward the industrial district, past the old military training grounds that had been decommissioned 5 years ago. Or so the public records claimed. Sarah made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who didn't know her real background. She stood up, moved toward the emergency exit window, and began loosening the safety latches with movements so smooth and practiced that none of the other passengers noticed. The driver was focused on navigating morning traffic. The other commuters were buried in their phones and newspapers. Nobody was paying attention to the quiet woman in the business suit who had ridden this route every weekday for 3 years. Sarah opened her purse and removed what appeared to be a compact umbrella. To anyone watching, she was simply a woman preparing for the weather forecast. But as she positioned herself near the window, her fingers found hidden clasps and release mechanisms that transformed the innocent-looking accessory into something far more sophisticated. The bus was moving at 35 miles per hour across the bridge's center span when Sarah triggered the emergency window release. The sudden rush of wind caused several passengers to look up in confusion, but by then she was already gone. From the bridge deck, witnesses later reported seeing what looked like a small figure falling toward the valley, then the distinctive canopy of a parachute deploying with military precision. But the descent trajectory seemed wrong somehow. Angled away from the river toward the restricted area near the old training grounds, the bus driver pulled over immediately, radioing for emergency services and passenger assistance. Police and paramedics responded within minutes, searching the river and surrounding areas for any sign of an accident victim. They found nothing. Meanwhile, 800 miles away, Bravo 7 was running out of time. The communications blackout lasted 18 minutes. Their ammunition was nearly depleted. The enemy forces had them surrounded in an abandoned factory complex, methodically closing the noose with overwhelming numerical superiority. Squad leader Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson had already accepted that they weren't going home. His men had fought with everything they had. But sometimes courage and training aren't enough. When you're outnumbered 20-1, that's when they heard the sound, not the distinctive whine of jet engines or the rhythmic beating of rotor blades. Something quieter but somehow more ominous. The barely audible whisper of fabric cutting through air at terminal velocity. Thompson pressed himself against the concrete wall and peered through a shattered window. The factory courtyard was swarming with hostile forces. At least 40 armed combatants moving in coordinated assault formations toward their position. Then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, everything changed. A figure descended from the darkness above the courtyard, parachute deploying at the last possible second for a combat landing that placed her directly behind enemy lines. She touched down between two guard positions with the silent grace of someone who had made this exact type of insertion countless times before. What happened next defied everything Thompson thought he knew about urban combat tactics. Moving with fluid precision that seemed almost choreographed, the figure began systematically dismantling the enemy formation. No unnecessary violence, no dramatic flourishes. Just efficient, professional work that neutralized threats with minimal noise and maximum effectiveness. Thompson watched through his scope as hostile positions went dark one by one. Sentries simply vanished from their posts. Communication nodes fell silent. The coordinated assault formation began fragmenting as confusion spread through enemy ranks. In less than 3 minutes, the factory courtyard was cleared out. Bravo 7 emerged from their defensive positions to find themselves alone among unconscious enemies who showed no signs of serious injury. Professional restraint techniques, non-lethal pressure points, tactical positioning that had rendered an entire company ineffective without a single fatality. But their rescuer had vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared, leaving behind only questions and the lingering scent of vanilla that somehow seemed familiar to Thompson, though he couldn't place where he might have encountered it before. Back at the Riverside Bridge, the bus driver was filling out incident reports while emergency responders continued their fruitless search of the river below. The missing passenger's purse had been left on her seat, containing a wallet with identification for Sarah Chen, age 28. Employed as a senior accountant at Morrison and Associates. Her employer confirmed that she had been a model employee for 3 years, punctual, reliable, with no history of erratic behavior or mental health issues. Her apartment showed no signs of disturbance, no indication of personal crisis or financial problems that might explain a sudden decision to jump from a moving bus. The security footage from the bridge showed only a brief glimpse of someone falling, too distant and too fast for positive identification. The parachute witnesses reported seemed impossible given the time frame and distance involved. Official records would eventually classify the incident as an unexplained disappearance, probably suicide, case closed. But 8 soldiers in a factory compound 800 miles away knew better. The crisis had been building for 72 hours before. Sarah Chun ever stepped onto that bus. Bravo 7 had been conducting routine reconnaissance near the Karnali industrial complex when their mission parameters changed overnight. What began as a simple intelligence-gathering operation transformed into something far more dangerous when intercepted communications revealed an imminent threat to civilian populations in 3 major cities. Staff: Sergeant Marcus Thompson received the updated orders at 0300 hours. His 8-man squad was now tasked with locating and neutralizing a weapons cache hidden somewhere within the sprawling factory compound. The intelligence was solid, the timeline was critical, and backup support was unavailable due to political sensitivities surrounding the operation. Thompson studied the satellite imagery with growing concern. The industrial complex covered 12 square miles of interconnected buildings, storage facilities, and manufacturing plants. Most structures had been abandoned for months, creating a perfect maze of hiding spots and defensive positions. Recent thermal scans showed heavy activity throughout the compound, suggesting the enemy had transformed the entire area into a fortified stronghold. "How many hostiles are we looking at?" asked Corporal Jake Martinez, the squad's communications specialist. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Thompson highlighted movement patterns on the tactical display. Conservative estimate: 60 to 80 armed combatants. They've had months to prepare defensive positions and establish supply lines. We're walking into their backyard. Private First Class Dylan Roberts, barely 21 and on his 2nd deployment, stared at the intelligence briefings with wide eyes. "Sir, shouldn't we wait for additional support? This seems like a job for a full company, not a squad." Thompson understood the kid's concern, but the timeline made larger operations impossible. The intelligence indicates they're moving the weapons cache within 48 hours. Once those materials disappear into the urban areas, we lose any chance of stopping what's coming. The squad spent the next 18 hours conducting approach reconnaissance and finalizing their infiltration plan. They would enter the complex through the southeast perimeter, using a drainage system that connected to the main facility's basement levels. From there, they would split into 2 teams to cover more ground while maintaining communication links. Everything went wrong from the moment they breached the compound. The drainage tunnels had been booby-trapped with motion sensors that triggered silent alarms throughout the facility. Instead of achieving surprise, Bravo 7 found themselves walking into a carefully orchestrated ambush that had been waiting for exactly this type of infiltration attempt. Enemy forces materialized from concealed positions with the coordination of a well-rehearsed military unit. These weren't untrained militants or desperate survivors. They moved with tactical precision, using advanced communication equipment and displaying familiarity with American military procedures that suggested professional training. Thompson's team found themselves pinned down in the factory's main assembly building, surrounded by hostile forces that seemed to anticipate their every tactical decision. The enemy had established interlocking fields of fire that made movement impossible, while systematically cutting off all escape routes. "Phoenix Base, this is Bravo 7, Martinez transmitted into his encrypted radio. "We are taking heavy fire and requesting immediate extraction. Our position is compromised." The response crackled through with devastating clarity. "Bravo 7, Phoenix Base. No extraction assets available at your location. Maintain position and await further instructions." Thompson felt his stomach drop. Military protocol demanded that extraction support be pre-positioned for exactly this type of scenario. The absence of available assets meant something had gone seriously wrong at the command level, possibly political complications that left field operatives exposed and expendable. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Sniper fire began picking off their defensive positions one by one, forcing the squad to abandon their planned rally points. The enemy demonstrated intimate knowledge of the building's layout, using hidden passages and elevated positions that didn't appear on any architectural plans. Specialist Lisa Park, the squad's medic, was treating shrapnel wounds on 2 team members when a concentrated assault forced them to retreat deeper into the facility. "We're running low on medical supplies," she reported, "and we've got civilians trapped in the East Wing who are going to be caught in the crossfire." The civilian factor complicated everything. Intelligence briefings had indicated the complex was abandoned, but thermal imaging revealed at least 30 non-combatants who appeared to be workers or refugees seeking shelter. Any aggressive defensive measures risked innocent casualties. While passive tactics guaranteed the squad's destruction, Thompson made the decision to establish a defensive perimeter around the civilian group, effectively sacrificing their own tactical advantages to protect people who shouldn't have been there. It was the right moral choice, but it sealed their fate from a military perspective. The enemy forces recognized the tactical shift immediately and began tightening their encirclement. They had numerical superiority, positional advantages, unlimited ammunition, and the luxury of time. Bravo 7 had depleted most of their resources, lost their mobility, and committed to protecting 30 civilians who couldn't be moved without exposing them to direct fire. Martinez continued transmitting situation reports every 15 minutes, but the responses from Phoenix Base grew increasingly bureaucratic. Request denied due to airspace restrictions. Extraction helicopters reassigned to higher priority missions. Ground support unavailable due to political considerations. "They're abandoning us," whispered Private Roberts, his voice barely audible, over the sound of incoming rounds impacting their concrete barrier. Thompson knew the kid was right, but leadership meant maintaining hope even when hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. "We hold this position, we protect those civilians. We don't quit until we're physically unable to continue." The hours stretched endlessly. Ammunition supplies dwindled to critical levels. The medical kit was nearly empty. Most importantly, the enemy forces were conducting methodical probing attacks designed to test their remaining defensive capabilities before launching a final overwhelming assault. At 1400 hours, the enemy deployed tear gas into the building's ventilation system, forcing Bravo 7 to don protective masks while trying to shield the civilians who had no protection. The chemical assault was followed by coordinated fire from multiple directions, a textbook suppression technique that indicated professional military training among their adversaries. Thompson realized they were facing former military personnel, possibly mercenaries or foreign special forces operating under unofficial parameters. The tactical sophistication was too advanced for irregular fighters, and their equipment suggested substantial financial backing from organized sources. "Sir," Martinez called out during a brief lull in the firing, "I'm picking up encrypted communications on military frequencies. These guys are coordinating with external support." The implications were terrifying. If the enemy had access to military communication networks and external support, Bravo 7 wasn't just outnumbered. They were facing an operation with resources that potentially exceeded their own government's commitment to their survival. As darkness fell over the industrial complex, Thompson conducted a final inventory of their remaining assets. 18 rounds of ammunition per person, 2 fragmentation grenades, 1 smoke canister, medical supplies sufficient for basic field treatment of minor wounds. Against them, an estimated 80 hostiles with unlimited ammunition, night vision, equipment, coordinated command structure, and the strategic patience to conduct a siege operation that could last for days. The math was brutally simple. Bravo 7 would be overrun within hours unless something miraculous occurred. Thompson keyed his radio for what he assumed would be their final transmission. "Phoenix Base, this is Bravo 7. We are completely surrounded. Request immediate extraction." "Repeat, immediate extraction." The response was static. Then, at exactly 16:47 hours, someone landed in the courtyard outside their position with the soft precision of a professional combat insertion. Thompson had no idea that 800 miles away, an accountant named Sarah Chun had just made the decision to miss her bus stop. Sarah Chun's parachute collapsed silently behind a shipping container stack, the sound of her landing masked by the industrial machinery that still hummed in the abandoned sectors of the Carnally complex. She had covered 800 miles in less than 4 hours using transportation methods that officially didn't exist in civilian records. The moment her feet touched concrete, she was already moving. No time to secure the chute, no pause to assess surroundings. The encrypted message on her phone had provided precise coordinates and a countdown timer that now showed 11 minutes and 37 seconds remaining. She moved through the shadows between warehouse buildings with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years learning to be invisible in hostile territory. Her business suit had been replaced during transit by tactical gear that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But the vanilla perfume remained, a deliberate signature that served purposes known only to her. The industrial complex sprawled before her like a concrete maze, but Sarah navigated the labyrinth as if she had memorized every pathway. She had studied the satellite imagery during her unconventional journey from the Riverside Bridge, identifying optimal infiltration routes and potential escape vectors while calculating the precise timing needed to reach Bravo 7 before their situation became irreversible. Through her tactical earpiece, she monitored enemy communications on frequencies that weren't supposed to be accessible to civilian equipment. The hostile forces were conducting final preparations for their assault, coordinating movement patterns and ammunition distribution with the efficiency of a professional military operation. Sarah paused at the corner of Building 7, pressed against the concrete wall while she observed the enemy positions through specialized optics that revealed thermal signatures and movement patterns invisible to standard surveillance equipment. What she saw confirmed her worst suspicions about this operation. The hostile forces weren't mercenaries or foreign agents. They were wearing modified American military equipment with identification markings that had been carefully obscured but not completely removed. This was a sanctioned operation being conducted with official resources but unofficial accountability. Someone within the command structure had deliberately placed Bravo 7 in an impossible situation, then withdrawn support to ensure their elimination. The weapons cache was real, but it was secondary to the primary mission of removing witnesses to something larger and more dangerous. Sarah felt a familiar cold anger settle in her chest. She had seen this pattern before, had lost people she cared about to operations that prioritized political convenience over human lives. Tonight, it stopped. She activated equipment that began jamming enemy communications across multiple frequencies, creating confusion in their coordination without triggering obvious technical failures. To the hostile forces, it would seem like atmospheric interference or equipment malfunction rather than deliberate electronic warfare. Moving deeper into the complex, Sarah began implementing a systematic disruption strategy that she had developed during years of operating in similar environments. The key was creating maximum confusion with minimum detection, allowing natural paranoia and communication breakdown to fragment enemy cohesion. The first sentry never saw her coming. One moment he was scanning the perimeter through night vision goggles. The next he was unconscious from a pressure point technique that would keep him immobile for exactly 45 minutes without permanent damage. Sarah secured his weapon and continued moving toward the next position. The second guard post presented more complex challenges. 2 sentries with overlapping fields of observation, positioned to provide mutual support against exactly the type of infiltration she was conducting. Sarah studied their patrol patterns for 90 seconds, then used a technique involving precisely timed sound, distraction and rapid movement that left both guards unconscious within 10 seconds of each other. She was dismantling their communication equipment when her earpiece crackled with Martinez's voice. Phoenix Base. This is Bravo 7. We are completely surrounded. Request immediate extraction. The desperation in his transmission confirmed that she had arrived at the critical moment. Bravo 7 was minutes away from being overrun, and conventional military support was deliberately unavailable. But Sarah Chun wasn't conventional military support. She moved through the enemy positions like a ghost that could manipulate physical reality. Guard posts went silent one by one, but not from violence or dramatic confrontation. The sentries simply disappeared from their positions, replaced by shadows and silence that gradually spread throughout the bayou. Hostile formation. The enemy command post was coordinating their final assault when their communications began fragmenting. Squad leaders reported losing contact with perimeter teams. Snipers found their positions compromised by equipment failures they couldn't diagnose. Supply teams discovered that their ammunition caches had been relocated to positions that left them exposed and vulnerable. Sarah worked with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a chess master, removing critical elements of the enemy operation without triggering the alarm that would precipitate immediate attack on Bravo 7's position. Every action was calculated to create maximum disruption while maintaining the illusion of systematic equipment failure rather than hostile infiltration. The breakthrough came when she reached the enemy command center, housed in a modified shipping container that served as their tactical operations base. Through surveillance equipment that she had acquired during her journey from the bridge, Sarah accessed their internal communications and discovered the full scope of the operation. Bravo 7 hadn't stumbled into an ambush. They had been deliberately guided into a kill zone as part of a larger operation designed to eliminate witnesses to arms trafficking involving American military equipment and foreign buyers. The weapons cache they were seeking was genuine, but it was evidence of corruption that reached into the highest levels of military command. The hostile forces had been hired to ensure that no American personnel survived to report what they had discovered. The political sensitivities that prevented official extraction support were manufactured to guarantee Bravo 7's elimination, while maintaining plausible deniability for the officials involved in the trafficking operation. Sarah felt the familiar weight of betrayal that came with discovering how far corruption could spread within institutions she had once trusted. But personal feelings were a luxury she couldn't afford while 8 soldiers waited for salvation that would never come through official channels. She began implementing the final phase of her intervention strategy, using techniques that she had developed during years of operating without institutional support or official recognition. The enemy command structure would collapse from within, creating chaos that would allow Bravo 7 to extract themselves while she eliminated the evidence of the larger conspiracy, working with tools that didn't appear in any military inventory. Sarah simultaneously disabled enemy communications, compromised their weapon systems, and created multiple false emergency situations that fragmented their tactical cohesion. Within minutes, the coordinated assault force had devolved into isolated groups of confused combatants who couldn't locate their targets or coordinate their actions. The hostile forces found themselves fighting shadows and responding to threats that materialized from impossible directions. Their night vision equipment malfunctioned at critical moments. Their communication systems provided contradictory information that sent teams to wrong locations. Their weapons experienced mysterious jamming that left them defensively vulnerable. Through it all, Sarah moved like smoke through their positions, always one step ahead of their increasingly desperate attempts to regain tactical control. She was rewriting the rules of engagement in real time, transforming their numerical superiority into a liability that worked against them. When Bravo 7 finally emerged from their defensive positions, they found themselves alone in a courtyard, littered with unconscious enemies and abandoned equipment. The coordinated assault that should have overwhelmed them had simply evaporated. But their mysterious rescuer had vanished as completely as she had appeared, leaving behind only questions and the lingering scent of vanilla that seemed strangely familiar yet impossible to place. Staff Sergeant Thompson stared at the empty courtyard and whispered the question that none of them could answer. Who the hell was that? Detective Rebecca Hayes had seen her share of unusual cases during 15 years with the Metro Police Department, but the Riverside Bridge incident defied every logical explanation she could construct. A woman vanishes from a moving bus, witnesses report seeing a parachute, but no body is recovered and no trace of parachuting equipment is found anywhere in the search area. The case file sat on her desk like an accusation. Sarah Chun, 28, senior accountant at Morrison & Associates. No history of mental illness, no financial troubles, no relationship problems that might explain a suicide attempt. Her apartment was immaculate, her bills paid, her social media accounts active until the morning she disappeared. Hayes studied the security footage from the bridge cameras for the 100th time. The timestamp showed 8:43 a.m. when something dark fell from the bus, but the image quality was too poor for positive identification. The parachute witnesses were credible: a construction foreman, 2 teachers, and a retired air traffic controller. But their accounts made no sense given the physics involved. A parachute deployment at that altitude and speed should have resulted in serious injury or death, explained Captain William Torres, the department's liaison with military personnel. Even assuming she had professional training, the risk factors are astronomical. Hayes pulled up traffic camera footage from surrounding streets, looking for any trace of Sarah's movements after the alleged jump. Nothing. It was as if she had simply vanished from existence at the moment she left the bus. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Angela Martinez, a professor of aerospace engineering at the local university, had been following the case through media reports and reached out to offer technical analysis. Detective Hayes, I've been studying the witness accounts and the environmental conditions. That morning, there's something you need to see. Dr. Martinez spread detailed meteorological data across Hayes's desk, highlighting wind patterns, atmospheric pressure, and temperature gradients over the Clearwater Valley. The thermal conditions that morning created what we call a dynamic lift corridor, essentially an invisible highway of air currents that could support controlled descent over much longer distances than normal parachuting would allow. Hayes stared at the data, trying to understand the implications. Are you saying she could have traveled miles from the bridge before landing? Not just could have. If she knew how to read these conditions and had the right equipment, she could have controlled her descent trajectory with remarkable precision. We're talking about techniques that are classified at the highest levels of military training. The investigation expanded beyond simple missing person protocols. Hayes began contacting military bases within a 500-mile radius, looking for any training programs that might explain Sarah's apparent expertise in advanced parachuting. Techniques. Fort Braxton's training records showed no Sarah Chun in their databases. Neither did Fort Williams or the Naval Special Operations Command. But buried in classified personnel files that required special clearance to access, Hayes found references to Project Nightfall, an experimental program that had been discontinued. 7 years earlier, the project details were heavily redacted, but the basic outline involved training civilian specialists in military infiltration techniques for operations that required absolute deniability. Participants were recruited from diverse professional backgrounds and trained to maintain their civilian identities while developing advanced tactical capabilities. Hayes felt a chill as she read the program's objectives: to create a network of assets capable of operating independently in crisis situations where conventional military response is politically unfeasible or operationally compromised. The program had been shut down after congressional oversight committees raised concerns. about accountability and command authority. All participants were supposedly debriefed and returned to civilian life with their military training classified at levels that made discussion illegal. But the timing aligned perfectly with Sarah Chun's employment history at Morrison & Associates, which had begun exactly 7 years ago. Hayes requested Sarah's complete background check files, diving deeper into her personal history than the initial missing person investigation had warranted. What she found raised more questions than answers. Sarah's educational records showed a bachelor's degree in accounting from State University, but her transcripts included advanced mathematics and physics courses that had no relevance to accounting careers. Her employment references were impeccable, but all came from companies that had been dissolved or sold within 2 years of providing the recommendations. Most intriguingly, Sarah's financial records showed regular deposits from a consulting firm called Meridian Analytics, which existed only as a registered business name with no physical address, no website, and no listed employees. Hayes ran Meridian Analytics through every database available to law enforcement. The company appeared to be a shell organization that had been established specifically to provide financial cover for activities that couldn't be traced through normal channels. The investigation took another unexpected turn when Hayes received a call from Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson at Fort Harrison. "Detective Hayes, I understand you're investigating a missing person case involving someone who might have parachuting experience. I think we need to talk." Thompson arrived at the police station with files that made Hayes's blood run cold. 8 soldiers had been extracted from a hostile situation overseas, under circumstances that defied official explanation. The rescue had been conducted by someone with capabilities that exceeded anything available through normal military channels. "We found this at the scene," Thompson said, placing an evidence bag on Hayes's desk. Inside was a crumpled bus ticket for Route 47, Downtown Express. Dated the same morning Sarah Chun had disappeared from the Riverside Bridge. Hayes stared at the ticket, her mind racing through the implications. "Sergeant, are you telling me that a missing accountant from our city somehow appeared in a combat zone 800 miles away on the same day she vanished? I'm telling you that someone saved 8 American lives using methods that shouldn't exist and left behind evidence that connects to your missing person case. That's not a coincidence." The investigation expanded to include federal agencies with jurisdiction over classified military operations. FBI Special Agent David Kumar arrived with authorization to access files that had been sealed under national security protocols. "Detective Hayes, what you've uncovered touches on programs that operate at the highest levels of classification. The individual you're looking for may not technically be missing. She may be fulfilling obligations that supersede normal civilian law enforcement." Kumar explained that certain military programs created legal gray areas where participants existed in a liminal space between civilian and military authority. Their actions were governed by protocols that prioritized operational security over conventional accountability. Sarah Chen may be operating under orders that make her officially invisible to standard investigation methods. Her disappearance from the bus could have been an activation event, a signal that her specialized skills were needed for a critical operation. Hayes felt the case slipping away from standard police work into territories that her department wasn't equipped to handle. But her instincts as an investigator demanded answers that satisfied logic rather than bureaucratic convenience. She began conducting unofficial surveillance of Sarah's apartment building, looking for any signs of activity that might indicate she had returned. The building's security cameras showed no unusual activity, but Hayes noticed something odd about the maintenance schedules. The parking garage was cleaned every Tuesday and Friday, but on the Thursday following Sarah's disappearance, industrial cleaning equipment had been used overnight. The timing suggested someone had needed to remove evidence of vehicles or equipment that shouldn't have been there. Hayes obtained the building's utility records and discovered anomalous power consumption in Sarah's apartment during the week Following her disappearance, someone had been using electricity in a supposedly vacant unit, possibly operating equipment that required significant power draw. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Eleanor Fitzpatrick, an elderly resident who lived across the hall from Sarah, approached Hayes with information she had been reluctant to share. "Detective, I've been thinking about what happened to that nice girl. The morning she disappeared, I heard something unusual in the hallway around 3 a.m. It sounded like someone moving heavy equipment, but very quietly, like they were trying not to wake anyone." Mrs. Fitzpatrick looked through her peephole and seen figures in dark clothing wheeling what appeared to be specialized cases towards Sarah's apartment. They had moved with the quiet efficiency of professionals conducting a covert operation. "They were there for about an hour," she continued. "When they left, they had different cases, smaller ones that looked like they contained technical equipment. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after hearing about Sarah's disappearance, Hayes realized she was investigating something far more complex than a simple missing person case. Sarah Chun hadn't vanished randomly. She had been activated for an operation that required her to disappear from civilian life and operate in capacities that officially didn't exist. The evidence pointed to a network of highly trained individuals who maintained civilian identities while remaining available for operations that exceeded the capabilities or authority of conventional military forces. Sarah's parachute jump from the bridge hadn't been a suicide attempt or mental breakdown. It had been the beginning of a mission that saved 8 soldiers' lives while maintaining complete operational security, but understanding the truth only raised deeper questions about who Sarah really was and what other operations she might be conducting in the shadows of normal society. 7 years earlier, Sarah Chun had been a different person entirely. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, United States Army Intelligence, had graduated top of her class from West Point with degrees in mathematics and international relations. Her service record was exemplary: 2 tours in Afghanistan, commendations for analytical work that had prevented 3 major terrorist attacks, and recommendations for advanced training in counterintelligence operations. But her career trajectory changed forever on a humid August night in Kandahar province. Operation Silent Thunder was supposed to be a routine intelligence gathering mission. Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating a compound suspected of housing bomb-making materials that threatened American forward operating bases throughout the region. The mission had been planned for weeks, with multiple backup protocols and extraction procedures. Everything went wrong when political considerations overrode military necessity. 3 hours into the operation, Sarah's team discovered something that wasn't supposed to exist: American military equipment being sold to insurgent groups by contractors working for a defense corporation with congressional connections. The evidence was irrefutable: serial numbers, shipping manifests, and financial records that traced back to officials in Washington. Sarah transmitted the findings to command, expecting immediate support for securing the evidence and expanding the investigation. Instead, she received orders to abort the mission and return to base without collecting any materials that might compromise ongoing diplomatic negotiations. Captain Jennifer Walsh, Sarah's commanding officer, had served with distinction for 12 years and understood the implications of what they had discovered. "Chun, we have a choice to make. We can follow orders and let this evidence disappear, or we can secure it and face the consequences of exposing corruption at the highest levels." Sarah looked at the documents spread across the compound's main table, proof that American soldiers were being killed by weapons purchased with taxpayer money through a conspiracy that reached into the Pentagon itself. The moral calculation was simple, but the career implications were devastating. "We secure the evidence," Sarah decided. "Our oath is to protect American lives, not protect American politicians." The team spent the next 4 hours photographing documents, copying hard drives, and securing physical evidence that would prove the conspiracy. They had just finished when enemy forces launched a coordinated attack that should have been impossible given the operational security surrounding their mission. Someone had betrayed their location. Sarah's team found themselves trapped in the compound by overwhelming enemy forces who demonstrated tactical knowledge that could only have come from access to American military planning. The insurgents knew their extraction routes, their communication frequencies, and their contingency procedures. Captain Walsh realized the truth with horrifying clarity. They're not trying to capture us. They're trying to eliminate us and destroy. The evidence. The attack continued for 18 hours. Sarah's team held their defensive positions while enemy forces systematically destroyed every piece of equipment that might contain the evidence they had gathered. When helicopter gunships finally arrived to provide extraction support, nothing remained of the documents or computer files that had proven the weapons trafficking conspiracy. But Sarah had anticipated this outcome. Using techniques learned during advanced intelligence training, she had created duplicate copies of the most critical evidence and transmitted encrypted data packets to secure servers that existed outside normal military communication networks. The evidence would survive even if she didn't. The official after-action report classified Operation Silent Thunder as a successful intelligence gathering mission with no significant findings. The attack on the compound was attributed to coincidental insurgent activity unrelated to American operations. Sarah's team received commendations for their defensive actions and were reassigned to different units to prevent them from discussing their experiences. Sarah understood that her military career was effectively over. Within 6 months, she began experiencing what military personnel euphemistically called career obstacles. Promotion recommendations were delayed or lost. Training opportunities were assigned to other officers. Performance evaluations included subtle criticisms that had never appeared in her record before. The message was clear: her continued presence in military service was problematic for officials who preferred that certain discoveries remain buried. But Sarah had prepared for this possibility. During her final months of active duty, she was approached by Colonel Nathan Gray, a career intelligence officer who had been watching her situation with professional interest. Gray represented something that officially didn't exist: a recruitment program for military personnel whose specialized skills could serve national interests outside conventional command structures. Lieutenant Chun, your country still needs your abilities, but not in ways that can be officially acknowledged. Project Nightfall offers an alternative to the civilian life you're facing. Gray explained that certain military operations required capabilities that exceeded normal authorization. Procedures, political sensitivities, bureaucratic limitations, and diplomatic considerations sometimes prevented conventional forces from responding to threats that demanded immediate action. Project Nightfall trained selected military personnel to operate as civilian assets who could conduct missions that were essential but couldn't be officially sanctioned. Participants would receive advanced training in infiltration, combat operations, and technical specializations while maintaining civilian identities that provided perfect cover for covert activities. You would officially leave military service. Gray continued. Your records would be classified, your training would be erased from official documentation, and you would establish a civilian life that serves as cover for operations that protect American interests. The program would provide Sarah with skills that exceeded anything available through conventional military training: electronic warfare, advanced parachuting techniques, precision combat operations, and technical capabilities that were developed specifically for situations where official military response was impossible or politically unfeasible. In exchange, she would sacrifice everything that connected her to her previous life. Sarah's family would be told that she had chosen civilian career opportunities over continued military service. Her friends would lose contact as she established new relationships that supported her cover identity. Her professional accomplishments would be classified at levels that made discussion illegal, effectively erasing her contributions from military history. Most importantly, she would operate without official support or recognition. Her successes would never be acknowledged, her sacrifices would never be recorded, and her failures could result in disavowal by the same government. She continued to serve. Sarah accepted the program with full understanding of its costs. The training lasted 18 months and took place at facilities that didn't appear on any government maps. She learned to parachute from impossible altitudes using equipment that provided capabilities beyond normal military specifications. Electronic warfare techniques that could disable enemy communications while maintaining her own operational security. Combat skills that emphasized precision and efficiency over conventional tactical doctrine. But the most important training involved psychological preparation for operating in complete isolation from institutional support. Sarah learned to make life or death decisions based on personal judgment rather than orders from superiors. To accept responsibility for outcomes that could never be officially acknowledged. To find motivation in protecting lives rather than advancing careers. When the training concluded, Sarah Chun the soldier ceased to exist in any official capacity. She established her civilian identity with credentials that would withstand any normal background investigation. Morrison and Associates hired an accountant with impeccable qualifications and no apparent connection to military service. Her apartment, her social relationships, and her daily routines were carefully constructed to provide perfect cover for someone who needed to blend seamlessly into civilian society. The financial support came through Meridian Analytics, a shell company that provided income streams for Project Nightfall assets while maintaining complete separation from government funding sources. Sarah's accounting work was genuine and professional, but it also served as cover for maintaining skills in financial analysis that were essential for tracking the kinds of corruption she had discovered in Kandahar. For 3 years, Sarah lived a quiet civilian life while remaining available for operations that required her specialized capabilities. The activation protocols were simple, encrypted messages that provided mission parameters and timeline requirements. No questions asked, no official oversight, no bureaucratic approval processes that might delay response to time-critical situations. She had conducted 17 operations during those 3 years, each one saving lives or preventing disasters that would never be publicly acknowledged. Highway accidents that were actually assassination attempts. Industrial accidents that were terrorist attacks. Natural disasters that provided cover for foreign intelligence operations. But the Karnali industrial complex mission was different. When Sarah received the activation message on the Route 47 bus, she recognized the operational parameters immediately. 8 American soldiers trapped in a conspiracy that involved the same kinds of weapons trafficking she had discovered years earlier in Afghanistan. The political sensitivities that prevented official support were identical to the forces that had ended her military career. History was repeating itself, but this time Sarah had the skills and authority to ensure a different outcome. Missing her bus stop wasn't an accident or oversight. It was the moment when Lieutenant Sarah Chun finally completed the mission that had begun 7 years earlier in a compound in Kandahar province. The evidence she had died to protect was finally being used to save the lives it was meant to preserve. The ripple effects of Sarah's intervention began appearing within hours of Bravo 7's extraction from the Karnali industrial complex. At Morrison and Associates, her absence from work initially caused minor administrative confusion. Patricia Williams, the office manager, tried calling Sarah's phone repeatedly throughout the morning, leaving increasingly concerned voicemails about missed client meetings and urgent quarterly reports that required her signature. By afternoon, Patricia had contacted building security to perform a wellness check. When the superintendent used his master key to enter Sarah's apartment, they found everything exactly as she had left it. Coffee cup still warm on the kitchen counter. Laptop open to spreadsheet applications. Work clothes laid out for them. Next day, asterisk but hidden throughout the apartment were subtle signs that told a different story to anyone trained to recognize them. The houseplants had been watered with enough moisture to last exactly 2 weeks. The refrigerator contained perishable items with expiration dates that suggested she hadn't expected to return soon. Most tellingly, her personal documents had been organized with the methodical precision of someone preparing for an extended absence. Patricia found herself becoming an inadvertent guardian of Sarah's civilian cover story. When clients called requesting meetings, she explained that Sarah was dealing with a family emergency and would return as soon as possible. When Detective Hayes interviewed her about Sarah's disappearance, Patricia provided character references that portrayed a dedicated employee with no apparent personal problems. But Patricia had noticed things that she mentioned to no one. Not even the police. Sarah's work patterns had changed subtly over the past 6 months. She had begun arriving earlier and staying later, not because her workload had increased, but because she seemed to be using the office's high-speed internet and secure communication systems for activities that weren't related to accounting. Late one evening, Patricia had returned to retrieve forgotten files and found Sarah working with specialized software that looked nothing like the financial applications Morrison and Associates used for client services. The screen had displayed what appeared to be satellite imagery and tactical planning modules before Sarah quickly closed the programs. Just researching investment opportunities in emerging markets, Sarah had explained with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Patricia had accepted the explanation at the time, but now it seemed like another piece of a puzzle that revealed Sarah's true nature only in retrospect. Meanwhile, 800 miles away, Bravo 7 was discovering that their rescue had triggered consequences that extended far beyond their survival. The unconscious hostile forces they had left behind in the Karnali complex had been found by follow-up teams carrying identification that connected them to private military contractors with ties to the same defense corporations Sarah had investigated years earlier. The weapons cache they had been seeking was recovered intact, providing evidence of arms trafficking that would eventually result in congressional investigations and criminal prosecutions. Staff Sergeant Thompson found himself debriefed by intelligence officers who seemed less interested in how his squad had survived than in who had made their survival possible. The questions focused on technical details that Thompson couldn't answer, the precise methods used to disable enemy communications, the electronic warfare techniques that had fragmented hostile coordination, the source of equipment that had capabilities exceeding standard military specifications. Sergeant, our analysis suggests that whoever conducted this intervention had access to classified technologies that are restricted to the highest levels of military authorization, explained Colonel Patricia Manning, the intelligence officer conducting the debrief. We need to understand how civilian assets might have acquired these capabilities. Thompson provided honest accounts of what he had witnessed, but his descriptions only deepened the mystery surrounding their rescuers' identity and resources. The precision of the operation suggested training that exceeded anything available through conventional military programs, while the equipment used demonstrated access to developmental technologies that officially didn't exist. The bus ticket found at the scene became the subject of intensive forensic analysis. The paper contained microscopic fibers that didn't match any commercial printing processes used by public transportation systems. The ink included trace elements that suggested specialized printing equipment designed to produce documents that would withstand detailed examination while providing no useful information about their source. Even more intriguingly, the ticket's timestamp had been altered using techniques that required access to the transit system's internal databases capabilities that implied either extensive hacking skills or cooperation from transportation officials who had reasons to support covert operations. The investigation led to discoveries that connected Sarah's disappearance to a network of similar incidents across the country. Over the past 5 years, local police departments had filed reports about missing persons who shared certain characteristics with Sarah Chun. All were professionals with exemplary records and no apparent personal problems. All had disappeared under circumstances that defied logical explanation. All had left behind evidence suggesting they had prepared for extended absences. Despite showing no signs of planning to leave their civilian lives, Detective Hayes began coordinating with law enforcement agencies in 12 different cities, sharing information about cases that had previously been treated as isolated incidents. The pattern that emerged suggested a nationwide network of individuals who maintained civilian identities while remaining available for operations that required them to vanish from normal society at a moment's notice. The network's sophistication became apparent through analysis of financial records associated with shell companies similar to Meridian Analytics. These organizations existed solely to provide cover for activities that couldn't be traced through normal government funding sources, yet they demonstrated coordination that suggested centralized planning and resource allocation. Bank records showed that these companies had provided financial support for operations in 17 different countries over the past decade. The funding patterns aligned with international incidents that had been resolved through methods that exceeded the capabilities of conventional diplomatic or military responses. Most remarkably, the network appeared to be self-sustaining and self-regulating. No government agency claimed oversight responsibility. No congressional committee received briefings about their activities, and no official budget allocation supported their operations. They existed in the spaces between institutional authorities, funded through methods that remained invisible to normal auditing procedures. But the network's influence on American national security was profound and completely undocumented. FBI analysts began correlating the timeline of network activities with resolved international crises that had been attributed to diplomatic breakthroughs or fortunate coincidences, terrorist attacks that had been prevented through anonymous tips, arms trafficking operations that had been disrupted by evidence that appeared without explanation, foreign intelligence networks that had been compromised by security breaches that couldn't be traced to official counterintelligence operations. The pattern suggested that Sarah and others like her had been conducting operations that protected American interests while maintaining complete operational security and plausible deniability for government officials who preferred not to acknowledge their activities. Special Agent Kumar found himself briefing congressional oversight committees about a network that had been protecting American lives and interests for years while remaining completely invisible to the officials who were supposedly responsible for national security policy. Committee members, we have discovered evidence of a covert network that has been conducting successful operations on behalf of American interests without official authorization, oversight, or acknowledgement. Their effectiveness exceeds anything achieved through conventional intelligence agencies, but their existence raises fundamental questions about accountability and democratic control over national security activities. The congressional response was predictably bureaucratic. Establish a classified investigation to determine whether the network should be officially recognized, regulated, or eliminated. The investigation would take years to complete and would likely conclude with recommendations for further study. But while politicians debated jurisdiction and oversight responsibilities, the network continued operating with the same quiet effectiveness that had characterized their activities for years. Sarah's apartment remained exactly as she had left it, maintained by building management who had been quietly contacted by representatives of Meridian Analytics with instructions to preserve everything until her eventual return. The payments for rent and utilities arrived precisely on schedule, but always from different sources that couldn't be traced back to any individual or organization. Patricia Williams continued managing Sarah's client accounts, telling anyone who asked that her colleague was handling sensitive family matters that required extended travel. The explanation satisfied most inquiries, but Patricia began noticing that certain clients seemed unusually understanding about Sarah's absence, as if they had been expecting it. Morrison and Associates senior partners never questioned the arrangement or demanded updates about when Sarah might return. Their acceptance seemed unusual for a business that typically demanded accountability from employees, but Patricia assumed they were showing compassion for difficult personal circumstances. She never suspected that Morrison and Associates itself was part of the network that supported individuals like Sarah Chun, providing civilian cover for operations that protected interests larger than quarterly profit reports or client satisfaction ratings. The legend of the woman who missed her bus stop was spreading through communities that understood the value of protection that operated beyond official recognition, carried by people who knew that some guardians worked best in complete anonymity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.